Original post. I, 28 am sitting in a high-rise office overlooking the city, sipping a glass of scotch that costs more than my dad's monthly car payment, and absolutely laughing my ass off. Meanwhile, my phone is buzzing itself off the desk with a relentless stream of texts from my mother and brother, calling me a heartless monster, a sociopath, and an ungrateful parasite. They're saying I ruined my father's life and destroyed the family legacy. Honestly, I have never felt more at peace. To understand why I'm enjoying this so much, we have to go back about 6 years to when my father decided I was a stain on his existence. Let's talk about my dad. He is the textbook definition of a narcissist who peaked in high school and never let anyone forget it. He's a mid-level regional manager at a mid-sized logistics and supply chain firm, a job he treats like he's the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. He rules the house with an iron fist, demands absolute, unquestioning obedience, and honestly views his children not as human beings, but as status symbols and extensions of his own fragile ego. If you didn't do exactly what he wanted, when he wanted, you were a failure in his eyes. He loved playing mind games, shifting the goalposts, and making sure everyone in the house knew he was the alpha. It was exhausting. Because of this dynamic, my household was split into a classic psychological experiment: the golden child versus the scapegoat. My younger brother was the golden child. He possessed zero backbone, nodded along to everything my dad said, went to the exact local college my dad chose for him, and eventually took a horribly underpaid, dead-end job at my dad's logistics firm just to stay under his thumb. Then there was me, the scapegoat. I was stubborn, highly tech-savvy, and I absolutely refused to kiss his gold-plated ring. Because I questioned his logic and didn't buy into his grind-set speeches, I was labeled the black sheep, the lazy one, and the disappointment. While my dad was busy berating me for not being more like my brother, I was quietly working 18-hour days in my bedroom. I had identified a massive flaw in the logistics industry, specifically how horribly outdated inventory tracking was. Irony of ironies, it was the exact problem my dad's company constantly bled money over, though he was too proud to admit his methods were ancient. I secretly built a niche SaaS, software as a service, platform that completely automated and streamlined regional inventory tracking. By my junior year of college, the software started gaining serious traction. It got to the point where I was making more in a week than my dad made in a month. I realized college was holding me back, so I made the executive decision to drop out and pursue my company full-time. I didn't tell a soul. Naturally, the truth came out. My dad accidentally saw a piece of mail from the university confirming my withdrawal. Instead of pulling me aside, he decided to turn it into a theatrical performance. He organized a massive family dinner, inviting my aunts, uncles, and grandparents, under the guise of celebrating my brother's promotion. Halfway through the meal, he clinked his glass, stood up, and pivoted the entire attention of the room to me. He delivered this grand, rehearsed monologue, looking down his nose at me in front of everyone. He said, "You're a loser. You've always been a loser, and you are officially dragging my respectable name through the mud by flipping burgers or whatever lazy delusion you've cooked up." He then announced that I was officially disowned. He claimed he was cutting me off financially, which was hilarious because I had been paying my own tuition and rent for 2 years anyway. He banned me from all future family holidays and stated I was no longer allowed in his house. To cap off the humiliation, he reached under his chair, pulled out a heavy-duty black trash bag, and threw it at my feet. Inside were my old childhood soccer trophies, some old clothes, and my high school yearbooks. He told me to take my garbage and get out of his sight. My mom sat there silently, looking at her plate. My brother had a smug, self-satisfied smirk on his face. The rest of the family just stared in shocked silence. My dad expected me to break down, cry, beg for forgiveness, and plead for his approval. Instead, I didn't shed a single tear. The air in the room felt incredibly clear. I stood up, picked up the trash bag, looked my dad dead in the eye, and calmly said, "Okay." Then I walked out. Over the next 4 years, I channeled every ounce of my energy into my SaaS platform. The company didn't just grow, it absolutely skyrocketed. I secured a massive round of venture capital funding, scaled our operations internationally, and suddenly, I was sitting on millions of dollars in personal liquidity and a massive corporate valuation. I completely cut contact with my family during those 4 years. But recently, I heard some news through an old mutual family friend. It turns out my dad's logistics company is in absolute shambles. Their outdated tech and terrible management, largely driven by my dad's department, have caused them to lose their biggest clients. The parent corporation that owns them wants out completely and has quietly put the entire regional firm up for sale to cut their losses. When I heard that, a switch flipped in my brain. I realized that between my personal liquid capital and my board's backing, I have more than enough money to buy the entire parent corporation out. I am about to do something so incredibly, beautifully petty, and my dad has absolutely no idea what's coming for him. Stay tuned. Update. Wow. I honestly didn't expect my first post to blow up the way it did. Thanks to everyone in the comments who called my dad a dinosaur and told me to burn his corporate world to the ground. A lot of you were asking if I actually went through with it, or if I was just talking big on an anonymous internet forum. Well, grab your popcorn, because the ink is officially dry on the contracts, and the absolute circus has begun. To answer your main question, yes, I bought his entire world, and I did it with a giant, petty smile on my face. Here is exactly how the takeover went down. I didn't just want to walk into his local office and hand him a business card. I wanted to play this like a corporate chess grandmaster. Instead of buying just his specific branch, which would have given the game away too early, my legal team and I targeted the entire regional holding corporation that owned his firm. They were bleeding cash and desperate to liquidate assets. So when my investment group made an aggressive, cash-heavy offer, they practically tripped over themselves to sign the papers. The brilliant part? I set up a brand new, private holding company specifically for this acquisition, meaning my actual name was buried deep inside layers of legal paperwork. To my dad, his boss, and the entire local board, the buyer was just an anonymous, massive venture firm called Vanguard Logistics Holdings. They had absolutely no clue that the sole proprietor and majority shareholder of Vanguard was the kid who got kicked out in a black trash bag 6 years ago. Once the deal officially closed, it was standard practice to schedule an emergency, all-hands, audit and introductory meeting at their main regional hub, which just happened to be the exact office where my dad worked. The official memo sent out by corporate stated that the new ownership group was flying in a representative to evaluate the branch's efficiency, review management, and decide who gets to keep their jobs. I woke up that morning feeling like a kid on Christmas. I put on a custom-tailored, charcoal gray three-piece suit, polished my shoes until I could see my reflection, and had my driver drop me off right at the front doors of his building. Walking through those glass doors, knowing I legally owned the literal bricks and mortar of the building, was a level of euphoria I can't even describe. I purposely arrived about 20 minutes early for the board meeting, dressed like a high-level executive, and sat casually in the main lobby lounge sipping a coffee. Right on cue, my dad walks through the security turnstiles holding a stack of folders. He looks stressed, sweating through his cheap dress shirt because of the corporate shakeup. He glances over at the lounge, stops dead in his tracks, and blinks. He literally rubs his eyes like he's seeing a ghost. He walks over to me, looking me up and down with this twisted, arrogant smirk, completely failing to recognize the quality of my suit. He scoffs and whispers harshly, "What the hell are you doing here? Did you follow me? Look, if you came crawling back to beg for money or a job because your little computer hobby failed, you're out of luck. Corporate bigwigs are coming today, and I am not letting a pathetic dropout ruin my reputation. Security is right down the hall, bud. You don't belong here. Get out before I have them throw you out." I didn't even stand up. I just took a slow sip of my coffee, looked him dead in the eye with a calm smile, and said, "Don't worry about me, Dad. We'll see who belongs here in about 10 minutes. He muttered something about me being a delusional loser and stormed off toward the elevators. 10 minutes later, the executive boardroom is packed. You could cut the tension with a knife. All the regional directors are sweating, including the branch CEO, a guy named Marcus, who used to be my dad's golfing buddy and the enabler of his toxic management style. My dad is sitting near the bottom of the table, looking incredibly smug and self-important. Marcus stands up to address the room, clearing his throat nervously. "All right, everyone. As you know, our parent company has been acquired. The majority shareholder and new chairman of the board is here today to personally inspect our operations. Please show him the utmost respect." The double doors to the boardroom open. My personal assistant walks in first, holding a tablet, and stands to the side. Then I walk in. The entire room stands up out of corporate reflex. I walk slowly to the head of the long mahogany table. I look down the line of faces, and I find my dad. Guys, I wish I had a camera recording his face. The color completely drained from his skin. He went from tan to a ghostly, sickly white in half a second. His eyes looked like they were going to pop out of his skull, and his jaw literally dropped open. He looked at Marcus, then looked at me, his hands visibly shaking on top of his legal pad. I sat down in the large executive leather chair at the head of the table, crossed my legs, and gestured for everyone else to sit. Marcus immediately starts kissing my feet, saying, "Sir, we are so honored to have you. We've prepared a full report on our quarterly metrics." I cut him off with a wave of my hand. "Thank you, Marcus. But I've already reviewed the metrics. And frankly, they are embarrassing." I opened my laptop and projected our internal audit onto the massive screen at the front of the room. I spent the next 20 minutes systematically dismantling my dad's entire professional existence in front of his peers, his subordinates, and his boss. I pointed out how his specific regional department was the single biggest money pit in the entire corporation. I showed graphs detailing how his outdated logistics methods, his refusal to adopt modern software, and his sheer managerial incompetence had cost the company millions in lost client retention. I didn't use his name directly. I just referred to his department as grossly mismanaged by archaic leadership. My dad just sat there, forced to swallow his pride, taking hit after hit to his ego while the entire room stared at him. He looked like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. After I adjourned the meeting, instructing the executives to have restructuring proposals on my desk by Monday, I walked out into the executive hallway. Sure enough, I hear heavy footsteps behind me. My dad corners me near a private alcove, his face purple with rage, shaking so hard he can barely breathe. He tries to speak in a hushed corporate whisper, but his voice is cracking. "What is this game? How dare you humiliate me like that? How did you do this? You're playing some sick joke. I am your father, you disrespectful little brat." The sheer narcissism was still there. Even when completely defeated, he thought he could still alpha male his way out of it by asserting his parental authority. I stopped, turned around, and looked down at him. The height dynamic had completely changed. I wasn't the scared kid in his dining room anymore. I said, very quietly and very clearly, "You disowned me, remember? You threw my life in a black trash bag and told me I was a stain on your name. To you, I am not your son. To you, I am the majority shareholder of the company that pays your salary." He stammered, trying to find words, but I didn't let him speak. I stepped closer and said, "Right now, your department is an anchor dragging my investment down. I don't care about your ego. Fix your numbers, or I will replace you with someone who actually knows what century we live in. Have a good afternoon, employee." I walked away, leaving him standing in the hallway completely shattered. By the time I got back to my hotel, my phone started exploding. My dad had clearly gone home and spun a massive web of lies to my mother and brother, painting himself as the victim of a malicious, unprovoked attack by his evil son. But I'm not done yet. The corporate audit isn't finished, and there's a lot of dirty laundry in his department that is about to come to light. I'll post the final update soon, because the house of cards is about to completely collapse. Final update. All right, Reddit, this is the final update. The dust has finally settled, the corporate house cleaning is complete, and I am officially done dealing with the toxic circus that is my biological family. Like I mentioned at the end of my last post, my dad wasted zero time running home to play the victim. The narrative he spun to my mother and brother was pure delusion. He claimed I was a bitter, vengeful psychopath who used stolen internet money to buy his company just to humiliate him in front of his peers. My phone became a weapon of mass distraction. My mother, who had sat in absolute, cowardly silence 6 years ago while my dad disowned me, suddenly found her voice. She sent me a massive paragraph text. "How could you do this to your own flesh and blood? You are letting money ruin your soul. Your father is a good man, and he is deeply depressed because of your cruelty. Family is supposed to support each other." Then came my brother, the golden child. His texts were a hilarious mix of dynamic shifting. At first, he called me an arrogant prick, but a few hours later, his tone completely changed, and he actually asked if I could leverage my position to promote him to an executive role since we're brothers and blood comes first. I didn't even bother replying. I just took screenshots from my legal team and muted their numbers. While they were busy crying foul and trying to guilt-trip me, my corporate transition team was doing actual work. I didn't have to fabricate any excuses to get rid of my dad. I just let the forensic accountants and compliance officers do their jobs. When a new ownership group takes over a struggling firm, the first thing they do is a deep-dive internal audit of the worst-performing departments, which, as we know, was my dad's logistics sector. What they uncovered was far worse than just standard incompetence. They found years of minor compliance infractions, heavily cooked efficiency reports, and blatant corporate favoritism. It turned out my dad had been using company funds to hand out unearned bonuses to his favorite employees, including my brother, while burying massive shipping errors under the rug. He had only survived this long because he was golf buddies with Marcus, the old branch CEO. But Marcus was already gone, and the new board wasn't playing games. The beauty of this entire situation is that I didn't even have to get my hands dirty. I didn't walk into his office like a movie villain and say, "You're fired." Instead, the newly appointed HR director and the corporate compliance board called my dad into a private meeting. They laid out the audit findings on the table. The evidence of corporate misconduct and negligence was completely undeniable. They gave him a very cold, very corporate ultimatum. Either face an immediate, messy termination for cause, which would mean stripping him of his corporate pension, losing his stock options, and potentially facing a legal lawsuit from the parent company, or sign an immediate, non-negotiable early retirement agreement with zero fanfare, zero severance, and an ironclad NDA. My dad, realizing his entire tough guy facade was completely worthless against a multi-million-dollar legal apparatus, signed the retirement papers on the spot. I watched from the second-floor glass balcony as my dad walked out of the building for the very last time. He was carrying a single, flimsy cardboard box filled with his desk calendar, a few pens, and a framed photo of his golf buddies. The poetic irony of that moment was absolutely staggering. 6 years ago, he handed me a black plastic trash bag filled with my childhood possessions and told me I was nothing. Now he was walking out of his lifelong career, completely defeated, carrying his entire professional legacy in a cheap cardboard box. He didn't look up at the balcony. He just stared at the pavement, got into his sedan, and drove away. A week later, my mother sent a desperate text through an unblocked email address, practically begging me to meet her at a local, upscale restaurant for a truce dinner to discuss family unity. Against my assistant's best advice, I actually showed up. I wanted to look them in the eye one last time to officially close this chapter of my life. I walked into the restaurant and sat across from my parents and my brother. The atmosphere was suffocating. My dad couldn't even look me in the eye. He just stared aggressively at his menu, his face tight with repressed humiliation. My mother immediately started crying, talking about how life is too short for grudges and how I needed to use my incredible wealth to fix the family and give my dad his dignity back. My brother sat there nodding along, looking like he was expecting a handout. I let them talk for about 5 minutes without interrupting. When they finally paused, expecting me to apologize or offer them money, I just took a deep breath and spoke calmly. I looked at my dad, then at my mother, and said, "You didn't want a son when I was struggling in my bedroom trying to build something. You didn't want a son when you threw my life into a garbage bag. You just wanted an obedient servant to feed your ego. You don't get to disown the kid and then try to claim the millionaire." I stood up from the table before the food even arrived. I pulled a $100 bill out of my wallet, dropped it on the table to cover the drinks, and looked at them one last time. "Don't ever contact me again. Enjoy retirement, Dad." I walked out of the restaurant, got into my car, and permanently blocked every single email address, phone number, and social media account associated with them. I also instructed my corporate HR team to keep a very close eye on my brother's performance metrics. He won't be getting fired unless he slips up, but his days of coasting on nepotism are officially over. My dad is now stuck at home, entirely miserable, stripped of the only thing he ever truly cared about, his corporate authority. He has no one left to power trip over except his own reflection. Meanwhile, my SaaS company just signed a massive international contract, and my future has never looked brighter. Success really is the absolute best revenge. To anyone out there dealing with a narcissistic parent who tells you that you'll never amount to anything, don't argue with them. Don't fight them. Just build your empire in silence and let your success do the talking. Thanks for reading my story, Reddit. This is the last you'll hear from me. Opie, signing off for good.